There we go. That was the event is being recorded, so welcome again. As I was saying, if we do for any reason encounter any technical difficulties, please do bear with us. The weather has been pretty dramatic today here in Wales, but I hope everyone is safe and well wherever you are in the world. So my name's Hannah Sterrett. I'm the Alumni and Supporter Engagement Officer at Cardiff University and fellow alumna of the university, and it is my privilege to introduce you to today's speakers. So Sandister Tei studied for her MA in International Journalism at Cardiff University. She describes herself as a media person because she's worked in different capacities for different platforms, broadcast and digital, for employers like Al Jazeera Media Network, City FM, City TV, and Multimedia Group in Ghana. She's a co-founder and an active volunteer of Wikimedia Ghana User Group, a Ghanaian group of Wikipedia editors. She was recently named the Wikimedian of the Year in October 2020 by Wikipedia co-founder Jimmy Wales in recognition of her work promoting open knowledge and developing open knowledge communities in Ghana. And Isobel, she studied her MA in news journalism at Cardiff University, and during her time on the course developed an interest in digital and social media journalism. She now works as a social media editor at The Economist, writing and producing content for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as working on things like push alerts, podcasts, and moderating Facebook groups. Part of her role within the wider social media and digital teams over the past year has been to ensure that accurate information regarding COVID-19, the US election, and Brexit is shared far and wide, and finding the best ways to present that information to different audiences. So before I turn to our esteemed panelists, I'd just like to remind our audience that if you do have any questions for Sandister or Isobel this evening, please enter them in the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And please, in your answer, can you let us know where in the world you are right now? I also thank everyone who submitted questions in advance, which I will ask throughout the evening. So welcome, Sandister and Isobel, and thank you very much for your time this evening. As we get into our topic of discussion for this evening, free access to knowledge, community empowerment and connectivity, I want everyone to reflect on how you've consumed the news and how this has changed over the past year. Significant events have happened that I'm sure generations to come will be reading about in textbooks. The media has had such a huge impact on the dissemination of information, opinion, and has created countless records and accounts of developments globally, not least on this historic day today, as I'm sure many of you will have just witnessed the inauguration of the new US president. That's why we chose the topic of discussion for tonight, and I hope all attendees will have some food for thought by the end of this discussion. So without further ado, let's kick off the evening. And can you both give us an overview of your career since Cardiff and how your degree has informed where you are now? Sandister, do you want to start? Oh, you're just on mute, sorry.
Okay.
There we go.
I've unmuted. Cool.
Welcome.
Okay, I would say that my career since Cardiff has brought me to a place where I can now call myself a media person, because I have held several roles in the media, maybe I can say industry. I started off at AJ Plus, that Al Jazeera Media Network, specifically AJ Plus, and that was straight up lots of digital media work, creating digital products for people to consume online. And then I was at City FM and City TV in Ghana, Accra. And then currently I've moved to Multimedia Group, the biggest media organization in Ghana at the moment, 6 radio stations, 3 TV channels, and 2 news websites, one of which is in the top 5 most visited websites in Ghana. So that's just me. And in between that, I have been doing digital media consultancy. I have had clients like the US Embassy in Accra. I train newsrooms and organizations on how to use social media. And also, of course, I have done work with Wikimedia Ghana User Group, and by extension, Wikipedia. So that's basically what I've done since I've left Cardiff. And I would say the degree has really informed where I am now. Right in the classrooms, I knew that I was being empowered, because when I look at the lineup of tutors I had, who are people who have been in the newsrooms, been everywhere in their areas of interest in the classroom to teach me, that gave me some confidence. I felt empowered. And ever since then, leaving, coming out into the world, I've that's just been me, an empowered person with a variety of multimedia journalistic skills, and I can fit nearly everywhere and do about anything in the newsroom and even out of it. So that is what the path, the journey has been, and how my degree has informed what I have become.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And how about yourself, Isobel?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me. Yeah, so I haven't got as many strings to my bow yet as Sandister. He's got so much experience. I actually graduated from Cardiff in 2019. So I have only, this is sort of, I've only been working in journalism for 18 months coming up. But when I left Cardiff, I started a job, well, it was a fellowship at The Economist, a social media fellowship, where I was, it was a very junior role, and I was working on things like producing content for all the social accounts for The Economist. And then about 6 months ago, I got promoted to a social media editor. And yeah, I think I can safely say that it's been a bit of a wild first year and I think pretty much everyone from my class at Cardiff probably feels the same, that it's a lot has happened within our first year of being out there in the world as journalists. So yeah, I think felt very prepared for a crazy year, but it wasn't expected.
Absolutely, my goodness. At least you'll get a lot of experience just in a very short time. I'm sure we'll refer back to this many years to come. Oh, you remember when that happened and what that day was like? Just, yeah, amazing. And for yourself, Isobel, what does the topic of discussion for the webinar that we're talking about this evening mean to you? So that's free access to knowledge, community empowerment and connectivity. Yeah,
so I think as long as I've been interested in journalism, there's always been a conversation about what should be free in terms of news and what shouldn't. Obviously, with things going digital, it's been really hard for a lot of media organisations and publishers to, keep themselves afloat. And so that's why I'm really interested in this topic, because from my point of view, from The Economist, we offer a lot of different things. We get our money from subscriptions. So that's really important to us, that people continue subscribing and buying the paper itself. But we've also realised that digitally we need to branch out, and there's lots of things that we can offer that you don't have to be subscribed for. But yeah, I think the events that have happened this year, sort of COVID-19, the election, they've kind of really hammered home that there are some things that people need to know the correct information, and they need to know it for free, and they need to be able to access it. Yeah, so this last year of working has really taught me that, and made me think a lot about the distinction between what should be free and what's the type of journalism that we need to pay for as well.
Absolutely. And how about for yourself, Sandister? What does this topic mean to you? Oh, sorry, you're on mute again.
Yes. Yeah, sorry, I keep forgetting. So for the topic, I mean, all three elements mentioned, from free access to knowledge, community empowerment, and connectivity, these are things that are really important in it's 2021. I believe, and that even informs the reason why I'm so excited to be a Wikimedian or Wikipedian, is that knowledge, just like health and a couple of other things, and for some, in the future, we should look at making all of these things free. Money shouldn't determine who remains ignorant and who remains informed. Money shouldn't determine who has access to live, healthcare, and whatnot. So I think knowledge has become that thing that, if we regard it so highly, then it means it just should be free to access. I mean, it can't be instantaneous. We have to work towards a future that does that. So for me, that's it. And when I separate that from community, look at community empowerment, I think that's also very necessary, because an empowered community contributes to storytelling. An empowered community contributes to information gathering. I look at what I do with Wikipedia, and certainly that comes into play, because you cannot leave the writing of an encyclopedia to just one group of people. And that's how come you have fewer women being written about as far as the biographies on Wikipedia is concerned. But when a community is empowered, it means everybody can just, come in, pitch in, and give what they have to offer. And then connectivity, where will we be, or what will the world be without connectivity? Look at everything that is happening now. So for me, all of these three things, I think what it means to me is that they are very necessary and they should happen. We should take steps to making sure that these things continue or are maintained in the globe as we know it, and even in the future to come.
I agree, absolutely. And how did you first get into Wikipedia and what it stands for?
So even before I came to Cardiff, I was doing a major in geography at uni, undergrad. And anytime I was learning anything, what I remember asking myself is, who else knows this? Anytime I got some new information, I asked myself, who else knows this? So I figured, well, then maybe if I am into knowledge and knowledge is that important to me, and passing on knowledge and information is that important to me, then I'm probably going to be an author, I'm going to be a journalist, or I could be a poet. I've even gone into advertising because I just like this thing of passing information on to others. But then I figured that journalism is the best path for me. And then also, of course, putting information out there in an encyclopedic manner, that also appealed to me, because in journalism, we like to be credible. We like to go with sources. We like to stick with facts. Wikipedia is a lot like that. So for me, that connection, wanting to be a journalist and then later discovering this wiki where I can get to put objective content. It's not about my personal opinion, but what is really the fact. That's where the attraction came from. And I've always told the story of how someone tweeted at me and invited me to edit Wikipedia in 2012, and the rest, they say, is history. So that's how come I found myself.
And what do you think the key to kind of Wikipedia's success in Ghana has been?
I think that whatever success is that the brand or the name or the concept of Wikipedia has had in Ghana, and there's so much more we can do, is community building. Because a lot of times people see Wikipedia, they know what Wikipedia is, but who is encouraging them, who is mentoring somebody to click on the edit button? So as we continue to build more communities across the country, which all the organizations that are stakeholders to this are doing and working hard at, like my group, Wikimedia Ghana User Group, we're organizing events, we're encouraging people to edit, we are teaching them to edit, and even if we have to provide people with internet and environments where they can sit and edit, we do just that. So that's the key thing that is helping Wikipedia's success, the success it has in Ghana right now, is community building, building communities that end up supporting the wiki and making sure that information about Ghana, it's available in its correct form for others to use.
Fantastic, thank you. And Isobel, just kind of going into The Economist a bit more, how do you think, through your work at The Economist, has played a part in making knowledge accessible to all? Obviously, it's very different to the context that Wikipedia operates in. And how do you kind of strike that balance between a media paywall and access to free information? What is the ideal there?
Yeah, I think this is a tough thing that a lot of publishers struggle with, because I think there is some part inside everyone who is a journalist and wants to be a journalist that thinks, yeah, I want to be able to give people information, and I want them to tell the story, and they should be able to, find out the truth and things. But obviously then there's the aspect of it, there needs to be money for the journalists to do their job. And I think, yeah, it's a question that a lot of publishers have struggled with. And I know for The Economist that when the pandemic sort of happened and we thought, oh, this is going to be a big deal, it kind of made us think about, this is a massive story that's affecting the world. What should we think about what we're giving people, our readers, because people deserve to read our journalism and find out more about what's going on in the world around them. And that's it. And we've kind of developed a few new things. We have launched a few newsletters, one that's specifically all about COVID-19, but in our daily newsletter, we make one article free to read every day. So all you need to do is register for an Economist account and sign up to the newsletter, and you can read whatever's the most important story about from anywhere in the world on COVID that day. So yeah, I think in what is a growing challenge with media going totally digital most of the time is how do you make that distinction between what should be free and what shouldn't? And I think a massive global event like this is the, you know, it kind of just threw it into our faces, that challenge of, you know, what should we be giving to our readers.
Fantastic. And Sandister, like, community empowerment has been so important during the pandemic. So how has this manifested itself in Wikipedia? Because my understanding is that Wikipedia is so successful because it's formed of a collective voice. Has that shown through in kind of all of the narrative around COVID?
Again, I I muted myself. Yes, I mean that's one of the striking features about how Wikipedia is built. There's a collective or a group of people coming together to gather information and share information. Without that, then it's not Wikipedia, because it's not meant for just one person or a group, just a selective group of people to do that. So that's, I think it's where our strengths come from. And even in these COVID times, I've seen a couple of media reports about how Wikipedia covered the pandemic. Even my community has been highlighted, and it's part of the reasons why I became Wikimedian or Wikipedian of the Year, is how we organized, sat together, not together, because a lot of these events were done remotely, and we just kept putting information on Wikipedia about the pandemic and what was developing. So that's our strength as a community, for people to sit together, or come together rather, and put information out. It's the biggest thing about what we do and how we do it.
Fantastic. And how have you observed news, both of you actually? Maybe we'll go for Isobel first. How have you observed news organisations innovating specifically during the pandemic, and kind of what has been the impact on the news organisations or organisations as a whole you're part of or have a bit more insight into?
I think news organisations, publishers, they've had to change massively, and they've had to make changes that probably were a long time coming in a lot of cases. The Economist, our films team, it's been a real challenge for them, because usually they'd be going out to different countries and filming and getting amazing footage and interviewing people and stuff, but that's not really been possible. So they've introduced a new format of Q&A films, and they've been really well received. And you've seen it with TV networks as well, and people presenting the 6 o'clock news from their living room and stuff like that. It's introduced a lot of new formats, I think, and, you know, more things, more news being done on things like social media. I think people have just had to get creative with the way they present stories. And I think for a lot of organizations, it's kind of hit home that everything doesn't necessarily have to be a polished video that, you know, has got amazing footage from all over the world. People just want to hear the journalism and find out more about what's going on. So yeah, I think it's, in a weird way, obviously it's stopped a lot of people in their tracks, and in some ways it's been bad for the journalism industry. I know a lot of different papers have, you know, had to make people redundant and things like that, which is really awful. But then in many ways it has actually been a good thing as well, because, you know, people have innovated. Like I said, we've at The Economist, we launched a COVID-19 newsletter. Our data journalism team, they're absolutely amazing, and they've launched various trackers where you can track the coronavirus around the world and look at things like excess mortality and compare what's going on in different countries. And it's, yeah, some of the work our journalists have done has been absolutely amazing, and they wouldn't have had the need to do that, wouldn't have been there if it weren't for the pandemic. So it's a lot of good things have come out of it, I think.
And Sandister, would you say there's been a big difference between media organisations in the UK and Ghana? And if so, what are they in that context?
I think from what Isobel said, in Ghana, there's a media organization that actually had news presenters do their reports from their homes, or they're presenting from their homes. There's still multimedia group, specifically Joy News channel. I think a very well-known reporter, Israelite. I think I saw some bulletins where he did stuff from his home. So that I have never seen being done in Ghana before. So during these times, I saw that, and if people did do, or newsrooms actually attempted that in the UK, then I guess I can say people were innovating in ways in which content can be fed into the newsroom and back onto our TV screens or onto our radio sets. So that I can say is similar. But I think when it comes to programming also, just like how the UK, maybe there were special programs, in Ghana it was the same. There was a show I know of, once again by the multimedia group, COVID and the Law, where two topics, I mean, what has COVID got to do with the law? But there were ways that the newsrooms were trying and the programs teams were trying to create content that is relevant to the times to help people cope, to help people understand and make sense of whatever it is that was happening. Also, people kicked into a lot of public service, newsrooms kicked into a lot of public service work. I mean, news in itself is public service, I think, majority of it, but newsrooms saw a time where they had to help the authorities, the health agencies, to tell people, hey, this is real, it's not safe for you to go out without a mask. Newsrooms really took that responsibility upon themselves and gave the state all the support they needed to get word out there that this is a pandemic and it needs to be taken seriously, and let people know how they can protect themselves and stay safe. So all of these things happened. And I also think that there was a toll on the newsrooms, just like in the UK. Suddenly, in some organizations, people had to go home. People had to go home because revenue had gone down, people's ability to advertise because of their own fears of the future. Oh, are we gonna fold? This is not the time to send advertisements and promotions to media organizations, So there was definitely a cutback on spending on ads, and that affected newsrooms as well. But I should say that it saw people working from home. Of course, some journalists also were sick themselves. They contracted the illness because we are in the business of going out and talking to people and interviewing people. So you meet people, and if you are not well protected, you can contract the virus, and then you have to be away from the newsroom for some time. So I think I would say it's similar. The experience sounds similar to me.
It's so interesting, all of the different elements that we've kind of taken almost for granted that is how things happen at the moment. But actually a year ago, work from home and people presenting in their living rooms, or even just this sort of conversation now where nobody would be office based, is just very, very different. So absolutely, they're really interesting insights you've both given there. I suppose this question is for Isobel. Have you noticed patterns of behaviour from your audiences, which gives an insight on how individuals consume news? And has your audience lost momentum the longer the pandemic has continued?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting what we've seen. I think, unsurprisingly, at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a big spike. Everyone was, sort of Googling, is this going to become a pandemic? Is this going to affect me? And like The Economist is a very global view on what's going on in the world. So I think one of our first covers about the pandemic was, about the virus potentially becoming a pandemic was, just over a year ago now, and it's a bit crazy to think of that, because at that point, we were thinking about it, but then ever since then interest grew, and as it did become a pandemic, our audience became really engaged, and all they wanted to read about was COVID-19 and how it was going to affect them, and how it's going to affect things like geopolitics, finance, the economy, the world. There's so many facets to it that people are interested in. And then over the summer, when things in some places started to ease, we did see a bit of a dip, and we were calling it pandemic fatigue, pandemic news fatigue. But what was interesting, while people were not necessarily wanting to read more about the pandemic itself, they were still interested in those forward-looking things. So, what's going to happen to finance after the pandemic? What's going to happen to travel after the pandemic? So I think as it's gone on, as it's developed, the journalism has developed too, and people have stayed interested in that kind of thing. And interestingly, we got a lot of new subscribers at the start who were obviously invested and wanted to know what was going on and wanted that, trusted source that The Economist is on a really important issue. And they've really stuck with us through it. So that's something we're really proud of, and we hope that we can manage to keep those audiences even beyond the pandemic, and keep them interested in the global view of the news that we give.
Fabulous. And Sandister, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, you were saying the question, please.
So it was really, your patterns of behaviour in your audiences and what you might have observed from a different perspective.
Okay, so it's the same. Well, I think that the audience, for us, we just noticed that there was a spike in Twitter use. So people looking for information, people now more than ever paying attention to state organizations that were stakeholders in managing the pandemic. I mean, the Ministry of Information's Twitter became very popular. And, at that point, you can tell that you have state agencies sharing the same kind of, should I say, importance on followership with media organizations, because usually people would listen to us, media, and some of what the state is saying. But now, just like the media was paying attention to the state organizations, I would say that the audience were doing the same. So that's what I noticed. Everything that the info minister would tweet, you could tell that there's a lot of engagement like I've never seen before, because people were looking for information. A very big research lab, which was also serving as one of the biggest testing centers, for example, they came on Twitter. Even if they've been there, they were quite unknown or unpopular, but suddenly everybody was following them and looking for information on how the pandemic was going, and cases, number of deaths and infections, and also keeping up to date with travel bans and all of the bits of information that mattered to us at that time. So that is what I noticed. And certainly what people were Googling for. And so that informs the kind of traffic you're also getting on the website. That also, people were very interested in content that has to do with the pandemic and staying safe and the cases and globally what's also happening. So there was certainly a spike in the interest in that kind of news.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of time on people's hands as well, because there was a lockdown.
Absolutely. I think everyone had a little bit more free time to pursue hobbies, but also to really follow the news and kind of trying and understand it in a bit more detail, because it was all so new, of course. And I suppose the concept of breaking news looks very different on Wikipedia to other news outlets. What purpose do you think Wikipedia serves in this space? And what do you think is the importance of a record being made for Wikipedia in real time? And have you got any examples of any pages that have used that effectively?
I will agree that the concept of breaking news is different from how news organizations would go about it. But then there are also some striking similarities. So first things is that while people are breaking news on news websites, traditional news websites, you have very limited information on the context of developing story. But Wikipedia is an encyclopedia, so there's like an overkill, more information than what you can fit on a news website or the page of a story, a page telling a story. So that's one of the differences that I can point out. But as far as developing is concerned and how fast pages are being updated, I think that Wikipedia has record speed, and it's comparable to how a newsroom, the speed at which newsrooms are able to break the news, because it's basically the same thing. News breaks, people know, it's up on a website. You can use it as a reference, and quickly that also becomes content as part of Wikipedia, and people can start using it. And we even have templates that we put at the top of Wikipedia articles and say that this is a developing story, so content is being changed really fast, and hence you should pay attention to that soon. So there's something, okay, I won't say editing articles and putting out develop stories of breaking news. You can't go to hyper local. The story has to be usable. So you have an organization like BBC doing some reports of interest because of the region that they cover, maybe BBC Africa, having interest in really Africa, really local. So these important stories, and what's important to their communities. Wikipedia is not into that, it's just about notability. So that topic needs to have some notability, and some of the topics can be covered on Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm. And how about for yourself? Oh, I think we might have lost Sandister there. Apologies if her signal was breaking up. I thought it might just be me, but fingers crossed we'll get her back in a second. Isobel, the concept of breaking news on The Economist. Have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one for us because The Economist is not a breaking news organization. I mean, our kind of whole thing is that something big happens and then we then like to come back with a considered take and think about what this means and what the future impact of it is going to be. But obviously during a pandemic, when there's new things, crazy things happening every day, that's quite tough. So we've definitely amped up our digital journalism, and there's a few things that we do to be able to respond when news is breaking and not look like we don't have any idea what's going on. So one of the big ways that we can do that is through social media. So part of what I do, I'll keep an eye on the news and what's happening that day, and then if something big happens, I'll look back through the Economist archive on what we've written about a particular subject before, and that I'll use our social media accounts to say, this news is happening. You can find out more about whatever it is that the news is about with our article from a couple of months ago or whatever. So that's one way that we do. And then we also have our daily podcast, The Intelligence, which I work on. I promote that each day and publish the podcast, and that's kind of a good way for us to be on the news, even if our journalists haven't started writing about it yet, or they can't provide that longer analytical considered take like that. Those type of things take a lot of reporting and time to create, but what we can do is get one of our correspondents on the podcast and say, what are your instant thoughts on this? So that's been a really good way. We've covered the pandemic and vaccines and all sorts of things like that through our daily podcast, and that's been a big help. And then I suppose one of the other things, if you're a publisher on Facebook, in the rare times that we do have a breaking story, you can get a tag on Facebook that says breaking news. So you got to be quick with things like that. But yeah, that's one of the ways that we that we signal it. One of the few times that we do actually get a big scoop. Yeah, that's one of the ways that we promote it.
It's really interesting hearing that kind of considered view. And actually, if you only publish once a week, breaking news does look very different, of course.
Yeah.
So that really makes it great insight.
It's interesting because obviously my training at Cardiff was very much, training to be a news journalist and do breaking news and that kind of thing. So I've learned quite a lot from, my first job in the industry, being in a place like The Economist that doesn't necessarily do breaking news. But I mean, some of the conversations that we have with editors, and it's really illuminating, because we talk about, yeah, okay, this has happened, but where do we think it's going to go? How is it going to matter to our readers? And yeah, so it's been a huge learning experience for me as well. So yeah, it's great to work on that in that kind of organization.
Great. We've probably got one chance for one more question before we wrap up. I can't believe how quickly this time has gone, and I'm sure we could all talk for a lot longer about this topic, but it is kind of a short whistle-stop tour of it. One question we had submitted in advance was, what are your both professional highlights of 2020? Of course, it was a year that we will all never forget, but was there any highlights for either of you? Sandister, do you want to go first? Oh, I think you're still on mute.
It was a year that I moved from one media organization to another, and that was my career highlight. I moved from City and I went to multimedia. I also tried other things because I just went beyond just being in journalism to transferring those skills into other communications jobs. So for me, that was my highlight. But all I'll just say is that one thing that the pandemic taught me is that, you know, sometimes just like you flip a switch, things can really change. And in your career, just always endeavor to, while you train yourself, you build yourself, try to broaden the scope of things that you're capable of doing as well. Don't just be one dimensional. And so when you launch out or you branch out, you feel the need to step out and do different things, I think you will be fine. Don't just narrow your scope or your focus. Be well read, be out there. And when you get the opportunity to work in teams, do your work very well so that you become memorable. That's one thing that has helped me, because even after I left my job, I get call-ups to come do this, come join us, do that. I had so many opportunities that I wouldn't have if I hadn't been so resourceful in the previous teams that I had worked with. So generally, that's what I have to say about my profession or being a professional, and the highlights that 2020 brought to me.
There was a lot of wisdom shared there, so I really appreciate that. Thank you. Isobel, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think for me, it's funny because I think I would have thought that, you know, working from home and moving out of the newsroom, which is, you know, obviously a great atmosphere to be in when something big happens, I kind of thought, oh, you know, I'm going to feel closed off and I'm not going to feel like I'm in the thick of it. But one of the huge events of the year was obviously America's election. And that day really stands out as a professional highlight to me, because it was one of those times where everyone was working together and collaborating. And sometimes a lot of the work that the social media team that I work on does is, you know, we'll take the articles and then re-promote them on social media, and, you know, we do our own journalism on social media too. But this was one of those times where everyone was working together, and we worked so hard to get various things out all through the day. We had various Instagram posts and Twitter threads and an Instagram story going out, and everyone was chipping in, you know, really senior editors. And, you know, we did so well at getting stuff out at the right time. And yeah, it was really great to have such a collaborative effort. And I was, at first I felt a bit sad that I'd be missing out on the traditional Economist election day, where there's, you know, a war room and it's all buzzing and it's all go. But I think I still felt that, you know, it was a massive day in history and I was contributing to getting that news out in the world. Yeah, so that's definitely a highlight for me.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you both very much. And I'm afraid we are out of time today, although really appreciated both of you sharing your insights and experience. As I said before, we could probably talk for a lot longer on this topic. And I suppose for me, I found it fascinating to learn more about the underlying principles of Wikipedia and how they're implemented in practice. And it's fantastic that Wikipedia is currently celebrating its 20th birthday. I certainly now have a greater understanding of why it is so successful. I'm sure it's through community empowerment and the actions of individuals collectively, such as yourself, Sandister, creating that collective voice. I suppose I've also learned about the principles of successful journalism and how this applies to the topic of our discussion this evening. There is a balance to be struck in terms of free access to knowledge, community empowerment and connectivity, which was definitely demonstrated this evening through Isobel and Sandister sharing their insights on the industry. I certainly look forward to reading with interest both The Economist's insight into this evening's historic inauguration and the updated Wikipedia page on the same topic. I'm sure I'll be going on to that shortly after this. We have had so many wonderful questions, so thank you so much for everybody in the audience who submitted those both advanced and this evening. But unfortunately not enough time to discuss them all live, but if you are a Cardiff alumnus or staff or student, you can join us on our exclusive platform, which is called Cardiff Connected, where we'll be continuing the conversation. If you are an alumnus of the university and you have a topic that you'd like to pitch for our For Alumni by Alumni series, either at a live webinar such as this, written blog or in our e-news, please do get in touch, and the details of how to do that will be in our follow-up email. Most of all, we hope you'll join Cardiff University for another virtual event. We've got a packed online event schedule, and you can access that full list via our website, which is cardiff.ac.uk/alumni/events. The next event is actually on Monday, the 25th of January at 5:15, which is discussing Cardiff's COVID-19 response with the Vice-Chancellor of Cardiff University, Professor Colin Reardon. And that link, if you're interested in that, will be in this follow-up email too. Our next alumni in this webinar series will be held on the 10th of February, and it's in celebration of LGBT+ History Month, and more details on this will be shared soon. As I've mentioned, you'll receive a follow-up email in the next few days with links to the recording of today's event and for the future events. But most of all, thank you so much to Sandister and Isobel for sharing your expertise so generously. Diolch yn fawr iawn. And thank you also to you, our audience, for joining us and asking some really important questions. Thank you again. Diolch yn fawr a hwyl fawr. Have a lovely evening. Thank you very much.